the session.
So let's start now. Can everybody who is connected hear me? Yes. So we have welcome everybody to this very exciting third meeting of the Science Policy Dialogue organized by the Climate and Clean Air Coalition Scientific Advisory Panel. Back in June, we discussed methane. Yesterday, we had a fantastic day discussing HFC potential. And today, the theme is Catalyzing 2030 Mitigation Ambition for Black Carbon. You probably all know that we are in the middle of developing a 2030 strategy for the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. And this dialogue is really helping us to identify the potential for what we can do as a coalition. And this is something we all urge you to comment on during today's dialogue. So humanity is pushing up against the ecological limits, triggering multiple crises that threatens public health, economic goals, social norms, and the ecosystem that sustain us. This is how we currently start the 2030 strategy. And this includes, of course, the threats such as the coronavirus. Emissions of warming gases and air pollutants continue unabated, driving a climate crisis that amplifies all others and making air pollution the greatest environmental threat to health. And time is of essence. We need to act quickly, and therefore the Climate and Clean Air Coalition is rising to meet these challenges and opportunities, and we are trying to articulate this in the 2030 strategies, redoubling our efforts to deliver concrete public health and economic benefits while simultaneously slowing the rate of near-term warming and temperature change. So today, since we will discuss the potential of reducing black carbon, what we really expect to hear from you, or anxious to hear from our excellent panels that have been lined up today, is more about the measures and the opportunities to reduce black carbon, how big the mitigation potential is, and what's the role and niche of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. Where do you think that we should prioritize our focus? We have the information, and we are quoting the potential to reduce black carbon emissions by 70% for 2030 relative to 2010. Is this feasible? What are the difficulties? So, very excited to be here to listening in today, and over to you, BP, to start off the discussions.
It's useful to unmute myself here. Thank you so much, Helena. My role here today, I am Nathan Parnell, or BP. I'm the science coordinator and coordinator of the scientific advisory panel for the CCAC. My role here is to lay out the ground rules and then quickly get out of the way so our experts can begin the dialogue. So for today, we have a very exciting agenda. We're going to begin with a presentation on the latest science of black carbon with the chair of our scientific advisory panel, Drew Schindel, and then quickly move over to session 1 on BC-rich sources. And then new on the agenda, we are slotting in between session 1 and session 2 a presentation by another member of our SAP, Zhang Kejun, from the NDRC in China, who will speak very quickly about China's new 2060 carbon neutral pledge and implications for air pollution. Then we will have session 2 about other BC sources, opportunities and challenges, and session 3 will be a very dynamic session, I believe, on public health and clean air commitments, opportunities and challenges. If you have any questions, so all of the attendees, you will be permanently on mute and unable to turn on your videos. If you wish to participate in the dialogue, we have a chat function that you can use to send us questions. Also, post this event, you will all receive automatically a electronic survey, which will include each of the questions that were asked of the discussants, and it'll give you an opportunity to provide written comments to contribute to the 2030 strategy. And we'll make sure that this is all reflected in the report for the Science Policy Dialogue. Just a couple of good practice comments for our panelists. During your panel, please do turn on your video so we can see you, and make sure that you mute yourself when you are not speaking. That way everybody will be able to see your smiling faces, but we'll be able to hear our speakers and presenters very clearly. Without further ado, I would very much like to hand this over to my distinguished colleague, the chair of the Scientific Advisory Panel, Drew Shindell. I'm making you the presenter now, Drew.
Thank you, Nathan. Good morning or afternoon, depending on time, evening, wherever you are. I'm going to talk fairly briefly to set the stage for the 3 sessions here on black carbon. And I hope you can now see my screen. Okay, so science update. Especially want to talk a little bit about things that are have come out in recent evaluations of where we need to go to meet trends like meet targets such as a 1.5 degree. So this is from the 2018 IPCC special report on 1.5, and this shows all of the well, several of the key emission sources. We've got CO2 there on the left, but on the right column, the non-CO2, and we have emissions changing relative to 2010. And you can see that under all of these scenarios, there are large decreases in black carbon. If we talk about black carbon by 2040, we are in the range of cutting it in half or so. By 2030, it's about a third is the magnitude of the reduction. It could be more than half. It depends on the particular scenario. And really reducing all of these non-CO2 emissions along with the cuts in CO2 are both critical to meeting 1.5 degree scenarios. 1.5 is extremely challenging, and meeting it requires essentially doing about as much as we can on all of the emissions over which we have some control here. So nitrous oxide is about the only one that doesn't necessarily drop. But black carbon uniformly drops in all of the 1.5 degree scenarios as part of the climate story. Now, we've looked a little bit about the emissions and how we might see a change from present day. So we've got the reference scenario, which has 2030 there from the gains model from YASA. And that has, I'll show you in a moment, a bit of a reduction already compared to today. But we have the chance with what Gaines calls this MFR scenario, the lower bars, maximum feasible reduction. And this is technical controls that already exist. So the kind of same model that we used back in 2011, doing a global assessment, what's achievable by scaling up those solutions that are already in place somewhere in the world. And we see that we can make an enormous dent in black carbon emissions, far more than a dent really, a huge reduction where the Gaines evaluation, the YASA results have a 60% reduction in BC by 2030 by applying the kind of measures that the CCAC has long worked on, with a possible reduction of up to 80%. That's even greater than what you see in the 1.5 degree scenario. So the more we do on any one of the emissions, the more we take the pressure off of all of the others. So there is an enormous potential here to reduce BC compared to where it's going in the reference case. Now, I've said a little bit about how this compares to 2011, and I want to make one more interesting point about that comparison, which is, here's the 2011 global assessment here on the left, where I've just brought out a few of the bars showing emissions, and the total magnitude is not key here. It's the relative strength. And what I want to show is that, from 1990 to 2005, we were still in a period where black carbon was increasing dramatically. At that point when we did the assessment a decade ago, we projected over the next 25 years out to 2030, almost no change in black carbon. And this was really a result of continued decreases in some of the OECD countries, North America and Europe in particular, and Japan, combined with increases in developing countries would give us essentially a balance. Now, when we look at, say, this is from the 2017 UNEP emissions gap report, we see that already the projection out to 2030 is changed, and it's a substantial drop. And that really comes from here, from China, where the emissions are, the projection here is a peak in 2010 and already a drop. And we've seen that in response to China's 2013 air pollution legislation, that they have actually made a lot of progress in reducing their particulate matter. Whereas places like the US and Europe here were already on downhill trajectories. So one of the slightly ironic things about this is the potential to reduce BC in 2030 is obviously smaller now when we do estimates compared to a lower reference than we had in 2010. Right? And so this is one of the reasons why we get a reduced value in terms of the climate benefit from reducing BC compared to 2010, because there's been success in the world. In particular, China's emission trajectory has changed quite dramatically. So we want to keep that in mind when I show you some of the results. Here are results from a recent study many of you may have heard of. This was led by a group in Oslo, and it shows the results of a whole bunch of different models, where if we start on the far left and look at the bars, and I won't go through all of these, we can see the temperature change in response to putting in the same BC perturbation in all the models. And so you see that the models are essentially all over the place. Right there, you can get a mean value out of these, but any individual model might give you a much larger result or a much smaller result. And I've put down in text here below that the efficacy of black carbon, in other words, how much climate change you get when you put in radiative forcing from black carbon relative to CO2, ranges from almost no response in a couple models, well, really just one, to actually a larger response than CO2. So the median value is 0.8. That means it's 80% as effective as CO2. But it is quite possible that it's less than that, and it's quite possible it's actually more, even more than one, so that it's more effective than CO2. And we really don't know. If you look at the far right bars for the Arctic, where we know there's an extra sensitivity to BC, then the median effect is about twice the global mean. But again, the models are just really all over the place. And now we have a deviation of, a factor of 5 or 6 across the different models. So this really reflects the complexity of BC, which is extremely hard to pin down in these models, because the more research we do, we find that the more processes there are that we should probably be including, but we don't have the computer power to actually include them. So we have to make lots of approximations in all the models. Therefore, the result varies quite substantially. This is why when we looked, one of the most recent studies I found was again from the UNEP emissions gap report from 2017. You can see the benefits that are evaluated then. Here for 2030 is in the middle column, and the benefits of tackling black carbon rich sources was 0.1, but the uncertainty is plus or minus 0.1. Uncertainty is essentially just about 100%. And so the result from Oslo is really not a surprise. We have always known that there's very high uncertainty in tackling black carbon emissions. Out to 2050, you get 0.2 plus or minus 0.2. And if you contrast that with something like methane in the second column, 0.3 plus or minus 0.1 essentially. So the uncertainty has always been far larger for BC, and it remains so. These values are less than we had in the 2011 assessment, and in large part that's due to the cuts that have already taken place in the reference scenario out to 2030. But the uncertainty remains high as it was in the 2011 assessment. Now I want to just, anybody who's been involved with the CC has probably seen this kind of chart before. I want to point out that one of the things we've always talked about with the CCAC's measures is that for climate, just looking at this first row here, It's avoided warming, certainly, but that's not the only thing. There's also reduced disruption of weather, reduced rate of melting, which is especially subject to influence by BC. When that dark pollution falls on snow and ice, it absorbs extra sunlight and speeds up melting. So it's not just global mean temperature change. And I want to just show you one more result from some of the very latest science. This is mostly from a paper that's just been accepted and is in press. And it shows the change in rainfall. It's a little hard to make out the continents, but you can maybe see Arabia over here. And so this is Asia. And the blue spots here with increased rainfall is mostly over India and South Asia, with a spot off to the right over China. And what we see here is that there's a big perturbation in rainfall in response to BC, which is on the left. It's about the same size as the perturbation in rainfall in the central column, which is in response to CO2. And yet the forcing here, in this case, was more than 3 times larger from CO2. So BC might have a similar or even slightly lower efficacy in driving global climate change than the same amount of forcing from CO2, but it has a much, much larger efficacy in shifting the Asian monsoon, at least 3 times more powerful than the equivalent change in CO2. And the experiment on the right is an experiment where the models only change BC emissions from Asia and show that most of the change in what happens to the Asian monsoon is driven by Asian emissions themselves, not exclusively, but most of that. And you can see how that's disconnected in the bottom row from surface temperature, right? Over India, there's so much pollution thrown out that it actually leads to cooling from all of the black carbon pollution. The sunlight just doesn't reach the surface where the pollution is so dense. And so this is why that the impact on the monsoon can be vastly different and larger than the effect on surface temperature. Surface temperature doesn't even necessarily go the same direction. So I want to conclude with 2 slides here. One is, what have we learned about emissions? And for emissions, we've seen that they're declining, and they're expected to decline further under current policies. So we should be quite pleased that, in fact, our 2011 assessment is now a little bit out of date, because the world has made some progress on this, that we've had a success here. But a lot more could be done, and the rate of decrease could be much faster than is projected. And by region, this is most of the BC is going to be from Africa or from here divided Asia into 2 different parts, and that's about 90% of the worldwide emission. More than half of the worldwide emission comes from household energy, with transport the next big target. And that differs by region, where household energy is number 1 in most regions, but for the Americas and for Europe, transport is number 1. There's some new sectors compared to the 2011 report: kerosene, lighting, BC from flaring, off-road diesel, trash, etc. The last thing I want to say is that we've always taken an integrated multiple benefits approach, and I would say that is really critical for enabling the kind of ambitious action that Helena was just talking about, this possibility of cutting BC by 60–70% over the next couple decades. It's critical to make these kind of cuts to be on a 1.5 degree pathway, and yet getting people motivated to do them really requires an integrated approach that helps us realize that many of the benefits we get are not just from this global mean temperature change. And so most countries don't include BC in their NDCs, but by providing integrated analyses and tools like the LEAP IBC, we're able to enable decision makers to compare these different policies, reduce costs, and really increase, I think this last one is key, increase social, institutional, and economic feasibility by showing public health benefits, regional climate benefits, protection of the cryosphere, in addition to global mean temperature change. And so to conclude the science here in one sentence, I would say the science indicates that there are stronger particulate matter health impacts. We'll talk about that in the third session. So those benefits are likely even higher than we saw before. There are clearer regional climate impacts. We're really finally beginning to pin those down quite well, I would say. They're still highly uncertain global mean surface temperature responses, but they are almost certain to contribute to our overall trajectory towards a more sustainable climate. So that's the state of knowledge, and I look forward to questions, and I look forward to the SPD throughout today. Thanks very much, everybody. I'll stop sharing. Back to you, Nathan.
Thank you so much, Drew. That was wonderful. Incredible food for thought, and it's going to lead us through this hopefully very robust discussion. So without further ado, we're just a smidge behind now, but I'm pretty confident we can catch up in the upcoming sessions. I want to hand this over to Marcus Amon, another member of our scientific advisory panel. He's from the Institute of International Applied Systems Analysis. Marcus?
Thank you, Nathan. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm moderating the session 1, which is focusing on the black carbon-rich sources. And the specific perspective here is to discuss the opportunities and challenges for mitigation. This is not particularly new. I think we have also within the CCAC discussed this at length. But the specific focus today is what the CCAC should do or could do or should do in the coming years. And this is a dialogue. It's a science policy dialogue. So we have a 5 minutes in summary of the scientific background. And then we have 2 interventions from decision makers, policy makers. And afterwards, we have a guided dialogue between 2 panelists and statements also from the audience here. And I want to remind you that time is short, so to the speakers, please stick to this 5 minutes. And for the discussion, please use also the Q&A function, which was introduced before by Nathan, to pose your questions, so we can either respond to this or take them up in the minutes of the report. So with this, I want to hand over the floor to our first presenter, Science Policy Dialogue. We start with the science side, and this the introduction will be given by Graciela Pinimelis from the National University in Mexico. Please.
Thank you, Marcus.
Sorry.
Now you understand why I use Raga. Hello, everybody. As Marcus said, I want to give you a little bit of a background of the black carbon emissions, and I will start with these discussing the BC rich sources. And as Dr. Drew Shindell was mentioning, there's been a trend in a decreasing trend since 2011 initial report, and this is the trend that is expected for 2030. I have highlighted the orange sector, that is the transport sector, in red to bring a few more thoughts later on. I will go very fast because you have seen this image already in Drew's presentation, and saying that again there is a potential to really reduce emissions much further than the reference scenario using this maximum technically feasible opportunities. And this is what I want to talk a little bit more about, so I won't spend any time on this one. Okay, so I want to highlight the transport sector in megacities and urban centers as a target of opportunity. And both the assessments in the Asia Pacific and Latin American and Caribbean regions of the world that was sponsored by the CCAC concluded fairly similar or identified fairly similar opportunities in both regions that have several megacities, of course, India and China, many more megacities, and also Southeast Asia than Latin America. But Latin America, because of the smaller population, it has a sort of a dual nature. Some megacities that have emissions associated with more developed world, and also household cooking and household biomass burning for cooking and heating that is more similar to regions that in the developing world. So if we concentrate in the megacities, and we can identify some of the measures that we have known for a long time, and it's a mixture of measures that have to do with coordinated regulations, more emission controls, and inspection controls, as well as some very well known measures like the elimination of high emitters. I want for a moment to discuss this study that was done for Mexico City by a group of people from Harvard Chan School of Public Health in collaboration with the Environment Ministry of the city. And I want to highlight this graph because this is, I don't expect you to read all this, but this is a time series of some measure of ozone concentration since 1986 to 2015. So you have seen that in the late 80s, Mexico City was the most polluted city in the world, and that is not a good thing to be. So a lot of policies were implemented. So the government to control and try to implement a lot of things. And these things, all these policies did make a difference in the ozone concentration. So policies, this is a success story. We can do that. However, I want to mention one particular study, this particular study that shows the type of BC-rich emissions in the transport sector that circulate in the city. And you can see here these red, very large number of these huge trucks. And if you look, the different colors correspond to the type of technology. Very old technology is present, and very Euro 2, Euro 3, a lot of potential there for reduction. And these are the buses, the regular buses in green here that I have lighted. And again, they are very old technology. So the study identified the usual mitigation opportunities for these types and came up with a lot of potential with a net benefit in terms of cost. So it would reduce this PM, which it's difficult in many cities with secondary, but these are primary pollutants. So really the challenges are that there's a need to act in a coordinated way between national and local to mitigate both types of emissions, and to the national authorities and local authorities, national in particular, need to strengthen the emission standards and the ambient health standards, which in some countries are not only a single value. And to enforce the existing regulations. So that is very important because many countries already have something in the books, but they are not being enforced properly. And I want to highlight that cities that started early mitigating black carbon and ozone precursors, it's becoming more and more difficult to achieve major improvements because the early measures that reduce most of the emissions have already been taken into account. So there is there are some opportunities on very specific things that have to be identified. And in Mexico City, like in other places, there's been lessons from this COVID-19 lockdown. And not all the cities experienced blue skies. Mexico City had very high events of ozone and secondary particles and even primary particles associated with a transport by regional fires. And the meteorology was adverse, was inhibiting. So really, cities have to consider the possibility of transforming, especially the ones that, as I said, started early mitigating. There are few opportunities, but very few left for some places. Thank you.
Thank you, Graciela. I think this was a very nice summary and clearly pointing to the challenges. So, also from a scientific perspective, so what scientists can see, and I think we should immediately follow up with some perspectives from the policy side. And we have two interventions, and the first one is from Mr. Yi from the Beijing Municipal Ecology and Environment Bureau. And as far as I understand, this is a pre-recorded video. And I think, Nathan, you are in control of the screen here.
Yeah, can you stop sharing?
No, I think.
No. Oh, okay. Went the other way.
No, you
Sorry
started.
about that.
I don't know whether Nathan is still alive or awake.
Yes, I am here. I am here. I'm just waiting to receive presentation control.
Okay.
Okay, now we see you, Nathan.
Okay. Do you have it?
Yeah.
I do. Here we go. Begin shortly.
Hi everyone, my name is Ai. I'm from Beijing Ecology and Environment Bureau. It's my great honor to give you a presentation on vehicle emission control in Beijing. Now, let me share my PowerPoint. My presentation contains two parts. In the first part, I will introduce some basic information. The second part is a review of the vehicle emission control. First of all, I would like to give you some basic information.
Nathan,
yeah.
I think we hear the presentation, but we only see your screen.
All right, let me see if I can solve this problem. I apologize for this.
Otherwise, we just listen.
I think you might want to see the presentation, actually.
Now something has changed.
Here we go. Apologize. Bear with me for just one moment. Appear to be having trouble sharing this. I do apologize for the difficulty. We are almost there. Let's try this.
Yes. Hi everyone, my name is Ai. I'm from Beijing Ecology and Environment Bureau. It's my great honor to give you a presentation on vehicle emission control in Beijing.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes. Now, since we are really running late, I would suggest that we immediately go to the next presentation. And this will be intervention. This will be given by Jennifer Pedraza Vega from the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development in Colombia. So, Jennifer, if you are ready, then please start. Go ahead.
Yes, give me 1 second. I am going to share my screen. Can you see?
Yeah, I see. Perfect.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to tell about some policies, actions, and initiatives that Colombia has been implemented for the last 10 years to mitigate black carbon and greenhouse gas as well. Currently, our current policy framework includes several policies as a National Development Plan, the National Quality Strategy, the National Policy for Improvement the Air Quality, the first National Inventory for Black Carbon and Air Pollutants, and the National Strategy of Circular Economy. All of these policies are intended to strengthen air quality governance, improve the scientific and technical knowledge, promote the reduction of pollutant emissions for the stationary and mobile source, and create conditions for the industry sector to access economic and financing benefits for the projects, work or actions that contribute to lower emissions. In this context, the first stage to reduce short-lived climate pollutants in support and partners to the coalitions, we formulate the National Strategy for Mitigation of Short-Term Climate Pollutants. And I want to highlight the main points for this part. We understand that this strategy is particularly important because we have several air pollution challenges in big cities as Bogota, Medellin, Cali, and as we are located in tropical regions, our country is vulnerable to climate change effects. We need to include these actions because we have diversity of pollutants, several range of emission sources, and we need to include numerous sectoral programs for our industry sector. As a result, it was considered necessary to create synergies between climate change and air quality, as well as to improve the information available for these types of pollutants, integrate different how we can collect the data to create confident emissions inventories, evaluation of mitigation scenarios, estimate multiple benefits and monitoring. All of this as a way to develop the strategy for implementing these actions in our territory. As a result of these efforts, the national strategy was adopted in 2019 with the objective to identify and promote actions that contribute to the increased integration of SLCP mitigation in important national planning process. This strategy includes 5 action lines, including strengthening institutional capacity with the national and local authorities, environment authorities, integrate the else of SLCPs into climate change planning and reporting process, applying practical tools to collect data and analyze the cost benefits of these actions to reduce emissions. And the last one, but not the less important, our communication strategy to include all all actors, the citizens, the industry sector, the government, the universities, schools, all of these actors are implied in our strategy, in our national equality strategy, in our national strategy for mitigation of LCP. All actors has take actions to reduce these pollutants. To achieve, we defined three mitigation goals. Depends on the pollutant, and I want to highlight here for black carbon and matter particulate less than 2.5. We set at the main goal for 2030 the high quality standard of the World Health Organization as intermediate objective. So for that, we update our regulations to achieve this goal. To achieve these aims, our strategy outlines three sub-objectives. Firstly, this strategy seeks to adapt information management system related to SLCP to facilitate decisions and coordination between local and national environmental entities. The second one, we will aim to adopt specialized tools to quantify the cost benefits associated with these mitigation measures. And finally, we develop a national emission inventory for black carbon and integrate this estimation into our NDC update. And finally, Colombia will seek to strengthen institutional capacity among all relevant ministries. This work is not only for Ministry of Environment. We need to involve the Transport Ministry, the Industry Ministry, another than to attain these objectives. In this part, the first step of implementation this strategy, we have our first national inventory for black carbon and high quality pollutants. Also, I want to highlight, so we are focused on three sectors which have the higher contributions for the total inventory: the biomass burning, forest fires, the manufacturing and construction sector, and of course, brick sector is here, and the transport and energy sector. For the last several cooperation projects have been developed since 2013 with support of the coalitions in several sectors. So since 2015, the coalition has been working with our non-institutional allies as CAIM, concretely to reduce black carbon and carbon dioxide emissions in the brick sectors, considering health co-benefits. For transport sector, in 2019, Colombia had committed to implementing salt-free standard for new heavy-duty diesel engines by 2025. And by 2023, we will complete the transition to ultra-low sulfur diesel. And by 2035, all in-use heavy-duty vehicles will meet these standards. This is our goal. It's an ambitious goal, but we are working for that. And also, we are working in the oil and gas sector in a new regulation to avoid the fugitive emissions of methane. And this includes monitoring and reporting. And we are working in the co-stop sector. Try to implementing strategies for new technologies at low cost for these people in rural sectors. And of course, Colombia and most of the main cities are part of the Breathe Life initiative. To summarize, last year, we worked with coalition partners and received technical support to formulate these national strategies. And the development of the first national inventory of black carbon, pollutant criteria, and the use of tools to allow estimate the multiple benefits in these mitigation actions related with health, costs, etc. Currently, our work is focused on training of national stakeholders, the local and regional entities, and not government entities, and the academic sector as well, to undertake integrated greenhouse gas and CLCP and eye pollutant analysis using the LEAP tool. We are updating our NDC revision, including black carbon, and we expect to have the results by the end of 2020. We're working on developing the technical documentation and support on inclusion of CLCP within Colombia's updated NDC, and developing of guidance, training, workshops, and other communication materials on short-life climate pollutants, and linking air quality and climate change in support of the implementation of Colombian national strategy on air pollutants. And of course, we're working with another ministry to achieve our goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. This was very interesting. So I see that we are very short in time, so we have only 3 minutes instead of 30 minutes originally planned for the next topic, which is the dialogue. And to summarize what we have heard in the last 3 statements, I think we had a very clear and very pointed presentation on where, from a scientific perspective, the most relevant challenges for implementing action on the black carbon issue were what science would see. And then we have heard about very comprehensive plans in practice, how countries and governments are making up the plans to respond to this. And then I think we had also very nice stories, success stories, where these plans have already been implemented. And I think this gives us a very rich body of experience on the needs and what works. And I would like to invite now our 2 panelists to comment on this. And I think you can summarize the main question for this discussion here, and we don't have too much time, so I'm told we have maybe together 12 minutes for both of you, because then the next session is supposed to start. But the main perspective here is now, in view of this, what are the challenges, what works, what should be done? What do you think that CCAC should do as a next step with priority? What are the priority actions for the CCAC? And I would like to invite Francisco Posada from the International Council on Climate Transportation to maybe give his perspective. And afterwards, we have invited Ivan de Auer from the World Bank to present the bank's perspective. So Francisco, if you're there, then please, could you take the floor?
Hey, Marcos, good afternoon for you. Thank you for the invitation. And let me see, activate my...
And in the meantime, I think I would encourage all of you, please, to use this Q&A function, because we're running out of time. So I think all of us have to learn about this technology here. But your questions and input shouldn't be lost. So please. So Francesco, over to you.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, actually, was had a little presentation. It's not just a few slides that I would like to share to discuss the approaches from the transport sector to reducing black carbon emissions. Can you see the presentation right now?
Yes, I see something. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so basically, according to the Scientific Advisory Panel, CCAC, the goal of reducing short-lived climate pollutants is designed in a way that we can reduce avoid 0.5 Celsius of warming over the next 25 years. And to be able to do that, one of the goals is reducing the global contribution from black carbon by approximately 75% below 2010 levels by 2010. And the transportation sector, and I'm talking about the transportation sector side, has a significant role to play in that contribution. And I think this is the main slide I wanted to share with the attendees today. Basically, road transport black carbon emission reductions are driven by a handful of policies in major markets. We're talking about the introduction of new vehicle emission standards. And the policies that have been adopted or implemented since 2015. So this figure on the left is showing the black carbon emissions from global, every single country that is included in the inventory. And the brown line shows obviously the baseline, all the progress accomplished until 2015. And the red line, which is the next trend, shows the policies that have been already adopted or implemented since 2015 by July of 2019. No? And you can see on the right there is a little blue wedge that shows the contribution from these latest policies. So if you think about the progress made in Europe, in the US, that is achieved in terms of soot-free emission standard adoption, that is reflected by the brown line. The implementation of similar standards, equivalent standards that require the adoption of diesel particulate filters in the heavy-duty sector, in heavy-duty diesel vehicles, that has been also slowly permeating other countries, and that contribution, which is the blue wedge, has been especially strong from a handful of players, especially China and India, where we get about almost 70% of the overall reduction in the next decade. So those are like huge wins from a global perspective in terms of short-lived climate pollutant reductions from the transport sector. But as you can see on the left, these achievements are not going to be enough to reach the goal that will allow us to mitigate the potential impact of a 0.5 Celsius increase in temperature in the future. So even though it has been very positive, there is still much more work to do. And basically, this is the main message of this presentation, is that we have to work together with other countries. And I'm actually very grateful that We have the presence of Colombia presenting their plans toward the future, because we need the contribution from every single country to be able to achieve the actual goals that we need to implement. So in the previous slide, you can see to be able to achieve the 75% reduction in black carbon from 2010 by 2030, we will have to go beyond what has been agreed in the last 2 or 3 years in terms of adopting soot-free standards, Euro 6 or EPA 2010 standards at a global level that forces diesel particulate filters in diesel vehicles. And
thank you. I think that's very interesting. Now, to the question, what CCAC, would be your advice, particular advice for CCAC? I think this is what we, where we're thinking, screening the horizon, how to proceed. Yeah. So you were saying that this international coordination is really essential here, because the measures have to penetrate at a large scale.
That is correct. We're in a good place, actually. The leading markets, the US, Europe, China, and India, have already incorporated these new technologies in their production lines. Those vehicles are already available for purchase by any other country. And the role of the CCAC, as I'm presenting in this slide, is that we need to continue supporting these countries. And as you can see in this slide, it's a significant contribution, what can be achieved from the rest of the countries that unfortunately have not moved yet to adoption of Euro 6 or EPA 2010 standards that incorporate or require the adoption of diesel particulate filters. So the role of the CCAC is critical in that regard. As you can see from this slide, we could avoid up to almost 3 million tons of black carbon from 2020 to 2030, which is equivalent to 40% of cumulative emission under adopted policies. And also more than half of the additional diesel black carbon emission potential is concentrated in 3 main regions, as you can see in this figure. The Gulf Cooperation Council, we're talking about Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other countries in the Gulf. The Arab Maghreb Union, which, as you can see, Algeria is one of the main players, as well as Morocco. Others in the Middle East, especially Egypt and Iran, have a huge potential for black carbon reduction. And going down in the list, ASEAN, the region is one of the most populated regions in the world. Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia, those countries have a huge potential for reduction. And the South African Development Communities Act, which includes South Africa. Just to stop in the list. Yeah.
Actually, I think that's a very nice illustration of where the big issues are.
Right.
And I think you very clearly pointed out that CCAC has a catalyzing role here in making the things happen. And I think this leads very well to the next panelist, and Yewande from the bank. And I think this is a perfect entry point. So from the bank perspective, I mean, you see the need and you hear the need, the call for international coordination. So how do you see the challenges for CCAC and also the direction for CCAC?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marcus. Good to see you. And thank you to CCAC for having me here. So in terms of where we see the opportunities where CCAC could help on moving this agenda forward, let me start first of all by saying that I fully agree with Drew about the fact that air pollution is like the main thing, and decarbonization can be considered as a co-benefit of good air quality policy. So coming from the World Bank, as you know, our business is supporting our clients to reduce poverty and to boost shared prosperity. So we're really concerned about the poorest and most vulnerable segments of the society in many of our client countries. And we provide financing for all sorts of for investments, for the policy changes that are needed, the transformational policies that are needed in order to reduce pollution, air pollution, and also including black carbon. We've done this in several countries throughout the world. In Peru, in China, we had the China example, in Laos, and we know that we have a need to scale this up, given the magnitude, severity of the problem. And at the same time, while working on implementation, we can also support the policy reforms in sectors such as transport, industry, which have been shown to be big areas where there's the potential. And then, of course, there's agriculture and waste management. So what can CCAC focus on? CCAC can help to catalyze a coordinated mechanism that includes all aspects of the supply chain, from monitoring, actually monitoring of air pollutants, of black carbon, which we know is a serious need in many of our client countries. There is a real dearth of monitoring, which just totally makes it very difficult to design and implement the required interventions and economically effective policies to reduce pollution levels and bring black carbon down. So there's that need for monitoring. So CCAC could play a role in helping to catalyze all aspects of the supply chain: monitoring, design and implementation of economically effective interventions, financing of those interventions, and even the ex-post monitoring of the results of those interventions. So those are areas where CCAC could come in. For the financing, that's an area that we work in the bank. We've been doing this for many decades. Over the past 2 decades, our lending has been about $50 billion in this area. So that's one area where CCAC can come in, catalyzing and coordinating, bringing together everybody, and coming out with a platform of collaboration also, where different agencies, different governments can work together on all these economically effective interventions. And so this will bring a coordinated approach that maximizes the synergies rather than having scattered and uncoordinated efforts. And then another area where I think that the CAC could focus on as well is that, of course, who are the people who are most affected by these climate emissions, black carbon emissions, and air pollution? It's the most vulnerable groups, and they typically do not have a voice in most countries. So there is a lack of a constituency that can push that for the social accountability, that can push for governments and private sector to take the interventions that are needed, to make the transformational policies that are needed. And so that's an area where CCAC could also focus on to help with advocacy, especially that is targeted to the most vulnerable, to the poorest groups of people in society. I think there's a very big role for that. And as I said, while that is going on with the advocacy, the bank is also able to provide the financing, technical assistance, analytical and advisory services. All we need is a request from our ministries of finance in our client countries. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Yvonne. Very clear. I think you highlighted the importance and the value of this catalyzing function of CCAC. I think the other important function in the past, at least, was this awareness raising, and now you added this additional point on taking advocacy role and giving voices to those who are affected but cannot really formulate and enter the discussion process. And I think these are very good directions, and will certainly feed the further deliberations within the CCAC on how to spend the very limited resources in the most effective way. So with this, I see now, thank you. We have exceeded, so I'm a terrible chair, so we have run over by 14 minutes, which I don't know how many percent of the allocated time this is. I think 30% is a record, I think. But so I think we have to draw this session to an end here, unfortunately. And there were so many issues mentioned which are important. But I'm sure there will be another opportunity to follow up on this, and I think this was very fruitful discussion and very important points raised. And with this, I want to hand over back to Nathan. And thank all the panelists here and participants, because these are really important points which had to be made in this occasion here. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you all the panelists. We are a little bit over time. I apologize, but I think we're going to catch up in the following sessions. That was amazing interventions. Without further ado, though, I would like to hand it over to another esteemed colleague of ours from the Scientific Advisory Panel, John K. to talk about China and their new commitments and in the perspective of the topic that we're talking about here today. So, Jun, please take over.
Thank you, Nathan. So can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, that's great. It's so nice to see many old friends here. And so my homework is talking about the Chinese new commitment about the carbon neutral before 2060. Yes, we are so excited for that because it's really outside our image. Even though we start work on the carbon neutral for 2050 for China from 2018 after the IPCC special report released, we increased our voice. But so far, still very few people in China talking about the carbon neutral. So it's really, we are so still very happy to hear that our President Xi Jinping announced this just 7 days ago to say China will make effort to be carbon neutral before 2060. So internally, we still work on the 2050 to be the target year from the research viewpoint. And for the pathways, we already published several papers, not only the general paper to talk about the pathway to be carbon neutral by 2050. We also have sector-wise, for example, the transport, the power generation sector, and then the hydrogen use, together with some investment analysis. So for me, when we make the modeling for that, we got convinced that it's very possible for China to do the carbon neutral before 2060. And actually, it's also not a very high cost because technology progressing is so fast. And actually, after EU announced the carbon neutral, climate neutral, that means greenhouse gas neutral by 2050, the game changing. I'm writing a paper to talk about game changing because the EU's commitment for climate neutral by 2050. So there's many things changed. Maybe in the coming future, the negotiation is not so important because everybody want to move. This is a carbon neutral things is changing to be a competition of technology progress. And who will do the R&D for new technologies? Who will be the leading country for that part? So when the China announced the carbon neutral story, the Japanese colleague also told me that Japan is preparing their own carbon neutral ideas, and will announce soon to follow up with China. And also some U.S. colleagues also told me that it's very possible U.S. will also announce their carbon neutral target. Even doesn't matter who will be the president there. So if in such a case, in China, we are seriously prepared for everything to do with the carbon neutral, because nowadays not only for the CO2 or greenhouse gases issues, but also technology R&D, what we should do with that. We are working on that side. And also recently we started to join the conference outside energy committees. So we joined the conference for steel making and also conference for chemical industry to help them to understand what's the future for carbon neutral, even though this activity is before the president announced the commitment. But this will be the very key issue for China to think about what's the near future for the 5-year plan, not only for the 14th 5-year plan, but also for the 15th 5-year plan. Something we must do to prepare for the carbon neutral before 2060. Another issue is China also commit the peaking year. So this time they changed the word to be from NDC, something like that. NDC is peaking around 2030 and trying to make peaking earlier. So this time is the announcement is peaking before 2030. So this is also the idea from many research team in China. But our team recommended China anyway will peak before 2022. So this is we still hold on that one. And by following this, come back to our topic today for CCAC for the short life climate pollutant and also black carbon things. We are still working hard on that because right now it's almost no modeling team is working on this. So with the collaboration with the CCAC, we got funding from your side, and we are working hardly on such kind of thing. Hopefully by November we'll provide our some preliminary scenario for the short life climate pollutant, which match with carbon neutral before 2060. Actually, still 2050 to be carbon neutral for China. Some scenario analysis for that. But from my side, because the CCAC, the many colleagues here is very good at the short life climate pollutant issues. What I want to get your advice is a whole package for reduction of short life climate pollutant to be something to be done in next 5 years or 10 years, so that we can put this into the planning for the 5-year plan in China. Because anyway, we should have some draft of the 5-year plan for environment and also 5-year plan for climate energy by end of next year. So we still have some time, but we do need to get advice from your side to help China to make this decision. So anyway, the carbon neutral before 2060 is still exciting story for us. We need some time to digest that and also change a little bit with our direction for the scenario analysis to intend that to be non-CO2 gases covered and also for non-energy sector to be covered. And also more widely think about the SDGs and also not only the air pollutant, not only the the greenhouse gases, but also some pollution from chemical industries also to be reduced a lot. I'm not sure because right now we just start working on that one. So let's still have some time to work on that out. So this is my idea, and I'm really keen to continue to work together with the colleagues from CCAC for such kind of big topic. Because right now, for the short life climate pollutant and other air pollution is still really very big blank in China. We need such kind of supporting from your side. Thank you very much. I finish here.
Thank you very much, Kejun. That was really interesting and important information there, and I agree it's really key for our future. So my name is Johan Xilen Chen. I'm with Kejun and Drew and Marcus on the Scientific Advisory Panel, and I'm going to moderate session 2. So in this session, we will address some of the complexities around the issue of mitigating BC sources. As we know that part of the excitement about mitigating emissions from sources of black carbon comes from the large health benefits. And when it comes to the benefits of SP mitigation, most of the health improvements are related to BC measures. That lead to the reductions of PM2.5, partly from reducing BC, but also other gases and particles that contribute to PM2.5. And as we know, many countries are attracted to CCAC because of these big health benefits from implementing measures. And of course, people are also excited about the reducing black carbon due to the black climate benefits. And we heard from Drew earlier that, you know, we've got the global temperature benefits, especially of BC-rich sources, which was the focus of the first session, where you have greater clarity. And here we have other sources as well, where the global temperature benefits are not quite so clear, but there are other benefits, both climate and clean air. So this is what we're going to discuss, these other sources in this session, and we have an excellent panel of scientists, decision makers and development specialists to discuss them. And could I please ask people to use the question and answer session facility to ask any questions, and then people can try and answer them as we go along. Now, we're going to start now with Professor Drew Shindell. You heard from him earlier, and Drew, if you could give us a short intervention about these other sources and build on what you told us before. If you could do that in 4 or 5 minutes, that would be great.
Thank you, Johan. I believe I can. I'll be quite short here. If it will play, there we go. So I just want to say a few things about the other BC sources, and most specifically, what do I mean by other? These are BC emissions with relatively low black carbon to organic carbon ratios. So this is, so a sector like diesel, which we just heard a lot about in the previous session, has a relatively high BC to OC ratio, and so it's quite clear that the BC is going to dominate over the OC, and you're going to get a climate benefit from reducing those. But for these ones that are in orange here, household energy, open burning, it is not necessarily as clear as the same thing for natural sources for fires. And so when you have a pollution source that is a substantial source, and actually the largest source of BC worldwide, the household energy sector, and yet you get a very large amount of co-emissions along with it, which I'm focusing here on the OC, but there's also carbon monoxide that makes ozone and such. You end up with a climate being driven by the residual, which is the offsetting influence. What's left over after all of these positive and negative things offset one another. The other thing that's really tricky about this is kind of obvious in some respects, but it depends on where they are. So if you think of the idealized case for black carbon as the very dark particle and organic carbon is the very light, right? If I put this out over the ocean, then you can see the dark one, there doesn't show up nearly as much, where the white one just jumps out. So if I'm emitting next to the ocean, say from West Africa, where it's being blown out to sea, or from the eastern coast of South America and it's blown out over the ocean, then you're going to have a much higher impact from the organic relative to the black. If I'm instead in the Indo-Gangetic Plain and it's drifting up over the Himalayas, right, now see the difference, right? The organic becomes almost totally irrelevant. And so part of the reason that we end up with large uncertainties in the impact of some of these sources is they're extremely sensitive to the location. And here's just a summary slide from the big Bounding BC paper that Tammy Bond led in 2013. And you can see that the difference between something like diesel, where the red here is the net effect of all of the short-lived pollutants, and so that was a positive forcing. It would cause warming. Reducing diesel would therefore help. And then this pink bar shows the added impact of CO2 over the long term. So both of these work in the same direction. The uncertainties are still large, right, with BC, but they're not enormous the way they are here for biofuel cooking. Right? So the impact in this analysis of biofuel cooking was either a large cooling or a large warming or anywhere in between. And so it's only when you add in the longer benefits of CO2, be avoided deforestation, in particular for biofuel cooking, you get a very clear climate benefit, but that doesn't mean that for a given region you wouldn't necessarily get a clear benefit from the short-lived pollutants too. Part of the uncertainty here is because this varies from place to place. And so focusing on these other BC sources, many of which are listed here, forests are down below. Many of these still have benefits over the long term due to the inclusion of CO2. Many of these have very clear benefits in both the short and long term if you focus on the regions where the black relative to the organic carbon is most important. So I think these are worth considering, as Johan mentioned in his introduction. clearly these are all very important for public health, but for climate, these can also be targeted, both the regional impacts on the monsoon, for example, that I mentioned before, or regional weather in Latin America, and they can be targeted to those regions where they're most effective for climate change. That's all I wanted to say in this introduction. I'm looking forward to some questions. So back to you, Johan.
Thank you very much. So I think it's really important that, there are climate benefits, but not necessarily, it's not all about the global mean temperature. And both this discussion and what you said before is really important for us when we're looking at these different sources. Now, what I'd like to do is to move straight on to the policymaker implementer presentations, and we have two people joining us. We have Dr. Supat Wongwangmatana, who's a senior advisor from the Thailand Environment Institute and formerly a head of the Pollution Control Department, so he really knows about what it takes to get things happening on the ground. So, Dr. Supat, would you please give us your presentation now?
Let me put my presentation on the screen. Okay. Can you see now?
Very soon. Screen? Yes, now we can see it. So please go ahead.
Okay. So what I'm going to do or present today is on how PM 2.5 and black carbon being addressed in Thailand lately in the recent year, not more than 2 years. First, I will give, this is the sky of Bangkok in the next couple of months to come. Today, the sky is blue, but in the next few months, the sky of Bangkok will turn to a brownish and a lot of small particles suspended in the air. Nonetheless, this is the level of PM 2.5 in Bangkok. On the left-hand side is the annual average concentration of PM 2.5 in Bangkok. And you will see the declining level of PM 2.5. It used to be at 35 microgram per cubic meter annually. But once Thailand adopted the 50 ppm sulfur fuel and Euro 4 vehicle emission standard, then we start to see the declining level of PM 2.5 in Bangkok, where we have 10 million vehicles on the road. That in spite of the increasing number of vehicles. But on the short term, Bangkok is still facing short-term daily average concentration very high, starting from the end of the year, as I mentioned earlier, and then it will go on become much higher in the beginning of each year, of every year. And this is a seasonal pattern. After April, then the level of PM 2.5 will go down because the air is open, rain start to come, so we have a lower level of PM 2.5 in the middle of the year, and will start to rise again at the end of the year. It's become a cycle like this every year. But the situation, if you see the daily PM 2.5 peak also been reduced lately in the last 2 years as well. The purple line here show PM 2.5 daily average early this year. See a lower peak than the previous year in the past. And that is a result of a lot of policy being implemented in the last 10 to 15 years to reduce. And the last 2 years, the Pollution Control Department and the Asia Center for Air Pollution Research in Japan has a collaboration project to do source apportionment of PM 2.5 in Bangkok, and OC and EC being analyzed as well. So in the figure, sample been taken actually the whole year, for the whole year. And you see the level of PM 2.5 at 3 sampling sites, road site, industrial site, and then residential site. The roadside area definitely has higher PM 2.5 level, and also the OC and EC. But the EC, OC of roadside seem to be lower than EC. But in the industrial side and in residential side, you see the ratio. It's or you see the level of OC is much higher than the elemental carbon, and the level will go up higher as indicated earlier by the level of PM 2.5, including OC and EC as well in January, and start to decline again in March. And this is and in April as well. You see the lower level, and once get into May, the situation will become better and better until the end of the year. So this is and the source and this figure actually show the OC and EC and iron content, and you see on the left hand side here when you have all the iron, OC and EC seem to have higher level than the iron, not only the higher of nitrate ions in the PM 2.5 in Bangkok. On the right hand side is the metal, which has the much higher level than the OC and EC and also iron as well. This is the source contribution, and I think this is the first time in Thailand that we have done source apportionment, and including OC and EC in the profile. Where are PM 2.5 come from? From the source apportionment, it happened that it's been concluded that PM 2.5 in Bangkok coming from diesel, probably the most 34%, and then the second major source are biomass burning, 28%, and the rest are 30% of secondary particle. Residential areas seem not to be residential sector seem not to be the major source of PM 2.5, because we all the cooking in the household now is using liquid petroleum gas, and also we do not need energy for heating in Thailand. It's already been very hot during this summer.
One minute, Dr. Supa.
Yeah, and you see the diesel and biomass burning here. This is the potential area where we can reduce PM 2.5 and black carbon, since a lot of them also have black carbon in it as a major component. The problem is not only in Bangkok; it's also in the north, but it will be probably 1 month later than Bangkok that we see high peak. And most of the source in the northern part coming from biomass burning. This might be the source that Drew has mentioned, that it's not really a big BC concentration, but we still do not have the source apportionment of PM 2.5 in the northern part of Thailand. A research is being carried out to do source profile for source of PM 2.5, and OC and EC will be included in the analysis as well. So at the end, when we compare, there will be a very large potential to reduce, opportunity to reduce air pollution and near-term climate impact at the same time. But for the developing country, as in Thailand, I think focus on air pollution will be more important than black carbon. Black carbon will be a kind of byproduct or second objective, providing co-benefit to PM 2.5 reduction. So this is a very large opportunity, and the Thai government has responded to that. the cabinet resolution on October 1st of last year to mitigate PM2.5. And by these measures, I think it will also has a result on the reduction of BC emission as well. The resolution includes two groups of action, and the first group of action is focusing on control and minimization of air pollutant emission from source. And you will see major source transport, open burning, and the target is to go for ultra low sulfur fuels, not more than 10 ppm, and Euro 6 vehicle emission standard by the end of 2024, something like that. And the improvement of mass rapid transit and the inspection and maintenance program, as mentioned by other speakers as well. But the open burning, that is a big problem, and sugarcane agricultural area will totally
could you wrap
ban
up
for burning. In a few minutes. Open burning in 2022 will not be allowed in the sugarcane, and the government will promote the use of agricultural waste instead of burning. Promote the plantation of single crop that will produce a product on a regular basis instead replacing the single crop into a standing timber, something like that. And the other source not so important as household, as I mentioned. And the second group of measures improve the management of air quality. This will include the updating the standard for PM2.5 as well to reach the WHO interim target 3. ASEAN Haze Agreement will have to be strengthened. These are all the measures that the government respond to the PM2.5 and hopefully also black carbon issue as well. The assessment on the effectiveness of this measure are being carried out to see how effective all these measures, one is implemented, will reduce the PM2.5 emission, and together with also the black carbon as well. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was really fascinating, and it's good to see that the peak levels are coming down, and I know that you've had a big input to that in Thailand, but there's some way to go, and clearly there's a link between the PM2.5 story and the black carbon. They're very interlinked. I think we're going to have to go straight through to the next speaker now, so thank you very much, Dr. Supat. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Abraham Martinez from the Centro de Ciencias de la Atmosfera from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, so and also in INEC. So, Abraham, would you be able to give us a short presentation, about 5 minutes, to tell us about your experience in Mexico with these sources?
Hi, thank you very much for the invitation. I don't know if I could not, BP can show my presentation because I have problems with my computer. So you can do it?
Yes, I can.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I will do very fast this presentation. It's coming.
It's opening. One moment, I apologize. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So next one, please. Sorry. Okay. This is the main the observed data show the first impacts in Mexico. The raising of the temperature, increase in the sea level, and the reduction in the precipitation. We also, in the case of Mexico, observe great intensity and the frequency of the hurricanes in the area. We have both sides of the seas, the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the Gulf of Mexico. So The question is, these changes will have impacts on health, for example, for us, and the answer is yes. Okay. For example, the ozone concentrations in the city will be increased in the future by the raising of the temperature in the cities. So for us, it's a big concern. Next one, please. In the case of Mexico, the monitoring in the cities is very important. Show the cities how the levels of the concentration of the pollutants. But we are reaching levels of stability. We can see here in the time we do a lot of efforts for make the reductions in the concentrations. For example, the city, Mexico City, is one of the biggest examples even in the world because it's like the laboratory for the concentrations of the chemistry in Mexico. So we can see how it's decreasing the concentrations regarding for the actions in many of the sources of the policy actions. But in the other cities, you can see it's, the variability of the concentrations is even in some cases going to decreasing, but in other sizes remain in some cases the stability. So we have a lot of the things to do. It's important for us monitoring the cities and how is the impact of the pollutants in the cities in terms of the policy actions. The next please, before. Other thing we are doing currently in Mexico, it's monitoring the black carbon concentrations. When we started with the coalition in our participation, we following the same to the other pollutants, try to understand the concentrations in the city. And one of the things that we are doing currently is try to monitoring. But the problem is the efforts in terms of the black carbon is we need to do continuously in other cities. This is an effort, experimental effort that we put in some cities, but we don't have in the rest of the cities. We want to do that in the future to understand how decreasing the concentration and, of course, how the sources and the action of the sources could be decrease the concentrations. Next one, please. One of the things that we developed in the CCAC during 2018 is the integrated strategy that we developed in shortly climate pollutants to improve their quality and reduce the impact of climate change. This strategy, the idea is to develop a strategy with climate change and actions on air quality to understand if we can get our 71% of the commitment for the black carbon, and we develop this analysis and we get these results, and you can see here we can meet the goal of 53% if we develop these actions. So it's important because we need to work with the sources, with other sources, and that's the things we get in this analysis and get in this document. Next one, please. Well, the main sources that we put in this analysis, these other main sources of black carbon that we did this exercise are the transport sector, the sugar mills, the transport, the brick kilns, for example, specifically for black carbon. To the other ones, we work in ozone, HFCs, and yesterday you talked about that, and the methane sectors. I will be focused only specifically for the black carbon. So for this presentation only, I will focus in the sugar mills because for the transport is clear the things we are doing, and for the brick kilns as well. But the sugar mills is the second sector, very important to Mexico to reduce the emissions of black carbon. Please, next one.
If you could do it within about 2 minutes, is that all right, Abraham?
Yes, I think it's 3 more slides and that's it. Okay. Sugar mills, specifically black carbon, we did this analysis with the LEAP model with my colleagues from the SEI, and we get this baseline for the black carbon. So we work with them, and we also put this analysis in the document of the synergies and actions. So you can see as relevant the actions to decrease the emissions of black carbon. For us, the action is the particle filters and the cogeneration as the way that we can reduce in this sector the emissions of black carbon. Next one, please. Well, the other thing we need to do is how to connect this with the actions in terms of the policy. So we understand how the sources impact for the air quality and the climate change. So in Mexico, we are currently working with the Research Council in Mexico to develop this research on climate and change and air quality. That's the actions to implement no-emission cities with a vision or territorial approach to improve air quality and reduce the impact on climate change. In the cities, our transport, our brick kilns, and our sugar mills, we can do these actions if we integrate this policy in terms of the cities. Next one, please. Okay, some considerations, just the 2 slides. The final is Mexico is taking concrete steps to in terms of the policy and the considerations to include air quality and climate change together. Air quality and criteria pollutants like short-lived climate pollutants has been incorporated in the National Program of Climate Change. This is the first time that Mexico includes in the policy the short-lived climate pollutants. Air quality and climate change are integrated in the federal environment, for example, in the agency plans. The PROMARNAT is an action that we can put climate change and air quality. And some states have been integrated air quality. For example, PRIDE is one of the programs that will put air quality for the cities, and the climate change, the name is PAC. So all of them are currently together, and we are harmonized both in the same way. And the other thing that we are looking forever is the multiple benefits in the actions. It's very important to Mexico to do art together. Next one, please. Yeah, I think it's the last one. The conclusions, for example, we did the SNAP with my colleagues from SEI and other colleagues from the CCAC, is the mitigation of air quality and climate change has a common origin, is the same sources. So we need to work together. We could not do in the opposite ways. It's the same sources. We need to do actions in the same sources for climate change and air quality. The integration of the narratives on air quality and climate change is possible, most of the sector, because we saw that many of the narratives in climate change are different to air quality. We can do it together, and one of the conclusions of this analysis. The roadmap is very important. We need to work with the inventories, because in other words, we are working to over or underestimate the mitigation or the sectoral mitigations. And the multiple benefits and the territorial planning is very important for us. And finally, the energy economy and territorial is very important to integrate in the policy actions. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Abraham. And I think I agree with you. There's a big opportunity if we can integrate the climate and clean air. And of course, that's perfect within the CCAC. So, you know, it's really impressive how that integration has gone forward in Mexico. Now, I'm going to, you know, try and keep to the time allotted. We have now a dialogue with 3 further people. So if I could introduce the panel, then I'll ask some key questions. So we've got 20 minutes now, and first I'll introduce Donnie Alexander, who's the Senior Director of the Clean Cooking Alliance. We also have Bidya Banmali Pradhan from ICIMOD, the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development in Nepal, and Thomas Damasa, who is the Senior Manager of Climate Change and Energy in Oxfam. Now, we have a number of key questions, and I'll point these questions at one of you and then ask the others to also input. Now, I want to start with where the greatest technical and political potential, where the CCAC can really help to catalyze mitigation consistent with the 1.5 degree C pathway, looking at all of these different sources. And I'd like to ask Bidya first, you know, with your work in Nepal and in the Himalayas, where do you think we've got a big potential to catalyze action that can help achieve 1.5?
Thank you, Johan. As you know, like South Asia is one of the hotspots of black carbon, and most of it's coming from the residential sector, and it's more site-specific. If you talk about the rural areas, it has more % than the urban areas. But anyway, like that more contributions are from fossil fuels and biomass. And the other thing that what I wanted to bring is South Asia has a huge potential for renewable energy and hydropower, which is really underutilized. And like if you think about the two big countries in South Asia, India and Pakistan, most of them use more than 70% of thermal power, which is from the fossil fuel. And I'm bringing a little bit of different perspective on this. And if South Asia needs to enhance this regional energy transfer to leverage the economic of scale and to also see that reduction in black carbon in a really huge way, then leveraging the shift from these biomass cooking to electric cook stove and also biomass diesel vehicles to electric vehicles would be one of the really good choice. And this can be done when there is a surplus electricity which is run by clean fuel. So there's a lot of, as CCAC these countries are all CCAC members, and the major hurdle is the cooperation on the energy sector within these South Asian countries. And, to increase this energy cooperation, some of the important steps that CCAC could also take is also doing a technical study on this cost analysis benefit of this hydropower, and also, also on the, identifying the technical and economical feasibility on cross-border interconnection. So these are some of the technical studies. And then on the political side, how we could, catalyze this, harmonizing the legal and regulatory framework dealing with this cross-border energy trades and treaties. So I guess as most of the these South Asian countries have become the CCAC member countries, so CCAC could initiate these dialogues, and where we could really, leapfrog in this energy sector, and then also has a very huge implications of reducing black carbon. I stop here, Johan.
Well, thank you very much. So, I mean, here we have some large-scale transformations that are possible, and really interesting to hear some of the solutions, and certainly that global dialogue is something the CCAC wants to, and regional dialogue is something the CCAC wants to concentrate on in the new strategy. Could I just ask if Donny and Thomas, would you like to weigh in on this question? I can't see you in the...
Hi, Johan. This is Thomas. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Great. So, yeah, thanks for the opportunity, and really appreciate the CCAC and SAP for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I would double down on what's been said for sure already, and just wanted to raise maybe a couple of sort of higher political opportunities that I think have been alluded to in a number of the country presentations. And so, for starters, I think even though this discussion is considering sources that don't necessarily have an immediate climate benefit, I think there's real continued value in the CCAC, looking to continue to engage countries around, in particular, their nationally determined contribution planning processes, but other national planning processes as well. One of the reasons, of course, is because of the strong regional climate impacts that these sources have, as Drew described, and two, because really at the end of the day, the NDC process is not just about words on paper, but what it means in terms of how governments are coordinating their responses to the climate crisis, which invariably includes coordinated action on air quality and addressing the needs of the most vulnerable, as we also heard, and we've seen several excellent country examples of that already. So, I think the CCAC can really leverage its strengths as a political momentum building organization to encourage countries to show leadership in their NDCs, putting forward solutions that highlight the multiple benefits that we've been talking about and build on the collective experiences. And then in that same vein, just one additional point is, I think, another near-term political opportunity is really working with governments and international financial institutions in particular as they continue to make considerations around stimulus investments in response to the COVID pandemic. And again, I think the CCAC is really well placed to articulate, essentially what it means to build back better, which is a term we've been hearing a lot lately. How do we define this sort of new economic pathway? And the CCAC, particularly for sources that are complicated like these, that have these multiple benefits, household energy, agriculture, transport, et cetera, I think highlighting those multiple dimensions of economic, social, environmental benefit is really important for the CCAC to continue their work in that space. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. So if I was going to paraphrase, Thomas, it would be that, the CCAC needs to help to accentuate or to highlight those benefits which come from the mitigation, take into account and maybe sort of like explain the complexity or going beyond the complexity to hit on the main issues, and especially to not forget the most vulnerable. Donnie, you've done a lot of work in these areas as well, I hear on the phone. Would you like to wade in?
Yeah, and thank you also for having me today. It's been a very interesting discussion. And I 100% agree with Thomas. I think he is right on where CCAC's value add can be going forward. And I think particularly working with governments to provide strategic capacity building support and technical assistance for some of this implementation of programs to meet their NDCs or other programs that may help in this area to reduce BC, I think, and look at the greater benefits related to air pollution as well, and health, climate, all of that together. Oftentimes, household energy and other sources don't fall in one ministry. They're kind of spread throughout because they touch on so many areas. And so working effectively with governments to ensure that it is actually included in a strategic and thoughtful way where there is a program which they can actually implement is really important. And I think we've seen that over and over where, governments need support in this area to actually come up with practical plans to have emissions reductions that also benefit, like I said, health and air pollution and all of that. So I think CCAC moving forward, focusing on that will be really important and a value add that is unique to CCAC for sure.
So would you agree that then the CCAC should help to this coordination in countries between different ministries to make sure that these issues don't fall between the cracks? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think it's important because they do fall between the cracks very often, and I think the SNAP initiative is very well placed, working with the ministries of environment oftentimes, but it's important to bring the other stakeholders into the conversation and make sure that there is coordination among those. There are places where they've done it well, or where there is a body in charge of household energy, for example, but in many places there aren't. And so that's when it becomes challenging to implement programs that look at emissions reductions from household energy sources. And so making sure that discussion is taking place and that there's concerted efforts and plans going forward. I think the capacity building and the strategic support in that area is really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there have been cases where the activities we've done through the CCAC, working with countries, has actually helped to facilitate coordination in the countries. So, there have been new collaborations that have been created through the work that's been done. So I think, I agree with you. I think it needs to continue. And something which is coming through in this is the multiple benefits aspect. So I was wondering if I could just go back quickly to Thomas. How do you think that the multiple benefits story needs to be brought forward by the CCAC?
Yeah, thanks, Johan. I mean, I think this is a great question, and this is definitely one of the things I want to raise as sort of, an area of focus for the CCAC. I think defining that multiple benefits concept has been really key, and to my mind, I think the next step is really to continue to unpack it and define metrics, with data, but also effective communications. And to my mind, that's moving beyond the tons and the degrees carbon or degrees Celsius and target dates, and really start talking about, has been brought home to me by colleagues within the CCAC, the shape of the emissions curve and the impact on people's lives. And I know the SAP has made some really important contributions in this space already, but this is just a call, I think, to continue to push in that direction, right? And we've talked a little bit about some of the benefits, but, to my mind, doing so that really allows for some of that de-siloing of actions that Donnie was just mentioning, ensuring that there's sort of intra-governmental coordination, because all of a sudden we're not sort of, pigeonholing, siloing work that's specifically climate or specifically air quality, but we're recognizing that indeed there's a number of touch points for any particular action. I think it's also critical, and the CCAC can play a role in this, in sort of broadening the decision-making table and the expertise. And Johan, you mentioned sort of the role that the CCAC has played in coordination. But I think it's also about recognizing, that we need to sort of broaden that set of experts when we're talking about some of these, really, really thorny and tricky problems or challenges like household energy, biomass burning, et cetera. We want the climate and clean air experts there, but we also need behavioral and social scientists or gender studies experts, rural community engagement and rural development leaders, and indigenous community leaders who are often the experts in forest management. And I think the CCAC can help elevate a number of diverse voices that really represent the full spectrum of considerations. And this echoes a bit of what Yewande spoke of before. And then really, for me, it's about sort of broadening the narrative and using that as a way to build coalitions, right? And the Sustainable Development Goals, I think, gave us a useful template for talking about sort of the multiple sort of touch points of SLCP mitigation. And particularly for these sectors, the narrative needs to be about air pollution. It needs to be about equity, resiliency, sustainable livelihoods, and health, as much as it is about climate. And these are often critical entry points, as I think Abraham highlighted, for decision makers, donors, and certainly citizens. And so these are sort of the direction of travel, I think, that we really need the CCAC to provide leadership in.
So what you're saying is that, as well as trying to create further synergies between ministries in other countries, we've got to create better synergies amongst our experts and what we bring to the countries and how we help them. I think that's a really good point. So is there, in terms of overcoming the barriers, do you have any further thoughts about how the SAP and the scientific and technical community can help here?
I mean, my specific point on that, and I don't necessarily have the technical expertise to know what's needed, but I do think your last point in just recognizing sort of the diversification and the broadening of expertise that is brought to bear on some of these challenges is going to be really critical moving forward, right? We're living in a multipolar, multidisciplinary world, and I think part of that new pathway is de-siloing work. So bringing in experts from diverse fields that often maybe don't cross paths, but I think that's something that the SAP can really steer sort of the scientific community towards.
Fantastic. Donnie, I was wondering if I could ask you a question. If we were to sort of make sure we achieve mitigation by 2030 in key sectors, and you work in a difficult sector, you might say, how can we make sure we achieve progress in the next 10 years?
Okay. Yeah, I will answer that. I just want to jump in on what Thomas said here about communicating to policymakers. And one of the things that I think CCAC could do going forward is that we found time and time again that the way scientists communicate often don't resonate with policymakers, or it's not in the way that they need information. And so some sort of effort to ensure that you're providing them with the data that they need in a digestible way is important. And so I just wanted to make that note that that's a lesson we've had to learn the hard way, is that providing scientific evidence is there's an art to it when working with policymakers, and that is something we focus on. And I would think that it would be helpful for the SAP to think about how to get that information to how to effectively communicate. But moving on to your second question, Johan, and how do we make progress and get to our goals for 2030? I think that's really challenging. I mean, we've been trying very hard for a very long time and had minimal progress. Where we have seen progress and where we've seen transitions have been where there have been governments who have had concerted efforts, and these governments have decided to make those changes based on evidence and based on political will for various reasons. But oftentimes they saw that, the potential, live, morbidity and mortality averted, for example, was one of the key things if you look at that, and in addition to the climate. So making sure that evidence is there and supporting governments to make these changes and have programs that actually move. And I'm thinking, of course, looking at, India and China and Indonesia, those large-scale programs where we've seen the major progress. And so I think continuing to support those efforts will be important because there's huge numbers that we have to reach. And so, a market-based approach is absolutely important, and we need to think about providing technologies and fuels and those types of things that people want to use and will use at a rate that is affordable. But we also need an enabling environment to support that. So the taxes and tariffs and the policies need to go along with that in order for these businesses to thrive and be able to produce quality products that people will use. And so without all of those things together, I think we're going to continue to struggle.
Great. I mean, so for political will, we need to base it on the evidence. We need the evidence put forward in the right way, and we also need to really understand what the way forward is in terms of technology and the policies needed. That's great. I was wondering if I could give the final word to Bidya. In terms of getting progress, from your perspective in the next 10 years, what is the way to unlock that progress and make sure that we achieve the mitigation, and with your experience in South Asia?
I guess it's no one way. We need to look at it from different ways. The previous speaker also talked about the behavioral change. So this is also very much that it needs to be hammered in case of South Asia, because we have the technologies, we know the things that need to be done, but still people don't do it because there's a lot of capacity building on behavioral changes issues that we need to hammer on. And what we see in most of the sectors, there's a technology intervention. If you talk about the cook stove, there are improved cook stove, there are electric cook stove, even on the brick sector that we have cleaner brick technologies. Also, if you talk about the open burning, there are technologies to stop open burning, but still a lot of things are still not done. Even when there is a political will, the governments are having clean air actions and also policies to ban these, but still people are using it. And there's a lot of changes that even in the political level that needs to be corrected, and also a lot of behavioral changes that need to be emphasized to really, reach to that point that what we need. And the other thing that what I think is there's a lack of capacities. Donnie mentioned about the intra-governmental issues, but also there's a lot of capacity needs within the government and the stakeholders that we need to build so that we are able to achieve this within these 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it's been a fantastic input from all of our panelists and presenters, and I'd like to thank you very much. It seems to me that if we look at what Thomas said about, we really need to look at the impact of all of this on people's lives. And from Drew, we heard that the impact, obviously of massively changing the monsoon is going to impact on people's lives. And we know the massive health impacts both indoors and outdoors from exposure to PM2.5. And then we've also heard from people that, how we're going to get through to the emission reductions needed. Partly this is clearly putting all of the expertise of the CCAC to bear, bringing it to bear in countries to give specialist knowledge, looking at the multiple benefits of action, linking to things like the SDGs, and then building the political will to take action with this information, not only on the national scale, but also in regions, and really looking at step changes, as Bidya said, in terms of electrification and other transformational policies that can go forward. And, these are all things which the CCAC can help to promote. So I'd like to thank everyone and then hand over back to you, Nathan, for the rest of the session.
Thank you very much, Johan, and thank you to everyone who participated in this second session and in the first session. That was wonderful, very thought-provoking presentations, very robust discussions with concrete suggestions for how we can all work together going forward. And it creates a very nice launch pad for us to move into the third session of the day, which is about public health and clean air commitments. If I can just summarize a little bit before we go in, the story of black carbon and indeed all short-lived climate pollutants is really a story about multiple benefits. And to steal a term from Tom, it's about de-siloing, particularly the management of climate change and air quality. This can be incredibly challenging. Our legal and regulatory systems, our metrics, the tools that we've developed, and even how we communicate about these inexorably and inherently interlinked issues, not just air quality and climate, certainly, but the systems that we've set up themselves, even our language, can actually reinforce these silos. And this is a particular challenge that we struggle with all the time in the scientific advisory panel and certainly within this coalition, and then when we communicate to the outside. And one very clear example of that being particularly with black carbon, we often, and I clearly fall into this trap as well, but we often fall into the trap that when we talk about black carbon and how to drive action on black carbon, we start from the frame of climate action. And talk about how that action can be enhanced by making the links explicit to air quality, public health, regional climate change, development, and equity, all of the things that Tom listed, which is a wonderful list. I wasn't able to mark them all down. And recognizing that it's so easy to fall into that frame where climate is first and everything else is there to enhance it. The purpose of this third session is really to flip the script and very explicitly look at it from the opposite direction. There is an enormous and growing interest in the world for managing air quality and reducing the burden of disease from exposure to poor air quality. A growing number of global, national, regional, local commitments to address air quality almost exclusively for public health reasons. And these commitments themselves serve potentially as an opportunity for us to drive action where climate benefits are the co-benefit of the public health objectives. So the purpose of this session is to really look at this growing body of commitments and action around air quality and public health and really see how we can help enhance that, particularly by making the links to climate change explicit. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to another member of our scientific advisory panel, Michael Brower. He's a professor at the University of British Columbia, to give us a short 5-minute presentation on the science.
Great, thank you, Nathan. Great, and without really belaboring the point, I think the main take-home message of everything I'm going to say is that air pollution is very important in terms of global health. This figure just shows where it ranks among other top risk factors for health, and on a global basis, air pollution is the 4th leading global health risk. It's responsible for 12% of all deaths that occur in the world each year, and that totals about 7 million deaths in 2019. This is the contributions from both ambient particulate matter, household air pollution from the use of residential fuels for cooking, and from ozone. And in an earlier analysis done several years ago, just looking at the cost of this is more than $5 trillion a year in welfare losses due to the health impacts on the global population, as well as lost labor income. And when countries have done cost effectiveness analysis, so for every unit that you spend, you may get between, depending on the action, 3 times that back in benefits to even 30 times back in benefits. So it's also a very cost-effective way to actually improve health of the population. Much more cost-effective than many actions that we actually are already taking from the medical side. These estimates are probably, or not probably, they're certainly underestimates, and they're underestimates for 2 reasons. One is that what I showed you, the figures of around 7 million deaths per year, are due to heart and lung disease, and we've recently added quantification of diabetes, as well as impacts on low birth weight and preterm birth. But we're doing more and more studies to really expand the health impacts that we can attribute to air pollution. We're seeing consistent evidence now on major diseases of importance, such as dementia, which is a growing concern given the aging of global populations. And then also things on the other side of the spectrum in terms of childhood development, impacts on childhood cognition, or diseases like autism. So even though we're quantifying these large numbers, they're very likely to be underestimates of the total burden on societies. And then the other reason is that when we look very, very carefully at countries that actually have relatively good air quality, we really see no evidence of a threshold, so no level that seems to be completely safe for the entire population. This is just some extensive work we've done in one of those countries, Canada, where I live, where we actually have very, very good air quality. And so it's a very good place to study the impacts of low levels of air pollution, and we really still cannot identify any safe level above sort of the natural background level of air pollution. Now, in terms of sources, and this has already been mentioned, but there's a lot of overlap between the sources of air pollution and the sources that contribute to warming and the sources that contribute SLTPs. If you just look at several of the sources that you've already heard about, for example, when we quantify this, the residential sector itself is responsible for about 20% of that overall burden, industrial pollution, another 12%, energy, another 10%, transportation, another 8% or so. And altogether, some of the sources that we've been talking about contribute about half of the overall burden of air pollution that we experience in the world. And this is just some preliminary data from an analysis that we're just completing, where we're actually doing this both globally, but for each country. And you can see the contributions of these important source sectors, the contributions of different fuels to the levels of air pollution and the health burden in each country. Altogether, fossil fuels contribute about 30% of the health burden globally. The solid biofuels that we've been talking about are about another 20% of that. So we can have huge benefits in terms of health, and at the same time see some of those climate benefits, both on the short term and on the long term basis. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Michael. Running right along here, and we'll get to all of this hopefully in the discussion period, but I'd like to introduce our two presenters from today, and I'd like to challenge them both to try to stick to 5 minutes for your presentations. I know that's
5 minutes?
That's unkind, but if you can do it, we will greatly appreciate it. I will grant you more time if necessary. So first up is Professor Yong-Pyo Kim, Chairman of the Science and Technology Committee of the National Council on Climate Change and Air Quality of the Republic of Korea. And I believe I will be managing your slides for you.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, this is Young Kim, and it's nice meeting you. I have just attended a late part of last session, and it was really nice. Well, I would like to briefly introduce about air quality management in South Korea. Is my voice is clear?
Yes.
Okay, then. Next slide, please. Well, the left side of this slide shows that the concentrations of the sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and the primary air pollutants, it has decreased drastically from the 1980s and 1990s, mainly due to the fuel regulation and tightening emission standard. But after 2000, we have the increase of the emission sources like vehicles and households. So we have made a new law, Special Act on Metropolitan Air Quality Improvement in 2007, and we mandated the installation of DPF, diesel particulate filter, used to diesel vehicles. And the right side of the slide is the concentration trend of the elemental carbon, that is similar to black carbon. And after the installation of DPF to the diesel vehicles, the elemental carbon concentration decreased from around 8 micrograms per cubic meter of air to around 1. So it was successful, but it was a limited success because we have the fine particle problem and ozone problem mainly generated in the air, so-called secondary air pollutant. The main reason we are still facing that secondary air pollutant problem is because the air quality management policy is mainly like a kind of benchmarking of foreign cases. The government is aware of the issue, air pollution issue, then they review the foreign cases and they try to find those solutions from benchmarking foreign cases, and then they develop their policies and implement. So we were kind of efficient in controlling the primary air pollutants, but not as efficient in secondary air pollutants. Next slide, please. Well, so the fine particles concentration on the left side of the slide is the fine particles concentration in Korea was the highest among so-called OECD countries, and that is mainly due to the industry structure and ours. The economy is based on the use of a huge amount of fossil fuels. So we have a higher PM2.5 concentration and higher emissions of carbon dioxide. That is our problem. And next slide, please. So recently, the South Korea has tried to change the paradigm of the air quality management. We tried to the benchmarking instead of benchmarking foreign cases, we tried to encourage public participation. So government and experts and stakeholders, including citizens, just identify the problem and try to find the solutions. They develop the air quality management scheme based on the public participation. And we try to identify what are our weaknesses. We try to diagnose what are the main problems in our policy implementation, and we found that we are very weak in understanding formation mechanisms of fine particles and ozone. And also another problem is policy prioritization and implementation. Those are very weak points in Korea. So we try to improve those two parts. Next slide, please. Another problem is the common problem in Northeast Asian countries. That is the primary energy consumption of the China, Japan, and South Korea. Those are first, fifth, and eighth countries in the world. And those three countries are in Northeast Asia. And the bottom figures are the concentrations of PAHs, the carcinogens, and almost the same emission sources of the black carbon. And left panel is Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, and right side is Seoul. And please note that y-axis are different by a factor of 10. So the PAH concentration in Ulaanbaatar is around 20 times or 30 times higher than Seoul. So it is a really health problem, and also similar is the emission sources like black carbon. So it's a climate crisis problem. So we need to cooperate to reduce those concentrations in Ulaanbaatar. And next slide, please. We have another problem in Northeast Asia, is North Korea. The left panel is the emission amount of the organic carbon and black carbon in North Korea and South Korea. And even though North Korea consumes less than 10% of the energy than South Korea, the emissions of organic carbon and black carbons are higher than South Korea, mainly due to the uses of the coal and biomass and very low quality is the air pollution control instrument. And the problem is, another problem is by doing so, they emit a lot of carbon dioxide. The right side is emission performance of coal-fired power plant. The North Korea emits around slightly less than 2 times of more carbon dioxide than South Korea with the same amount of electricity generation. That means North Korea is really in big trouble, and we need to help them to reduce air pollution and the emissions of carbon dioxide. Next slide, please. The National Council on Climate and Equality was established last year in 2019, and its main goal is management of air quality and climate crisis. So, the prior goal is the important goal of NCCA is to solve the Korea's air pollution, but also to solve the climate crisis problem, because air pollution and climate crisis is very closely related with energy uses. So recently we are now doing the NCCA is working on various energy policies like the national energy mix and energy pricing system in South Korea. And we are going to have a kind of public debate on next month on those two issues. And we are going to recommend the Korean government to what would be the energy mix and what would be the pricing systems for energy uses to control both air pollution and climate crisis. And we want to have international cooperation, as shown in below bottom of this slide, in East Asia, especially in Northeast Asia, in cooperation with the UNESCOP and the Northeast Asia Clean Air Partnership, to have some international cooperation in this area to identify the problem, develop the cooperation to reduce air pollution, and enhance clean energy supply in the region, and sharing knowledge and information in both in science and policy area. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Really excellent work going on in the Republic of Korea right now. I wish we could dwell on that, but we have to move along real quickly, and maybe we can pick this back up again during the discussion period. But I'd like to hand it over now to Daniel Benefo, he's a Senior Program Officer at the Environmental Protection Agency of Ghana. Daniel, take it away.
Hello?
I can hear you. There we go. The slides are up.
Yes, okay. Okay, good afternoon, colleagues. And I am presenting the opportunities and challenges from Ghana on this topic. So I want to start by saying that in Ghana, the air pollutants are mainly from 4 very important sources. Obviously, inefficient cooking, diesel engines, and open burning, and informal charcoal making are the key air pollutants there, especially with respect to black carbon in Ghana. And these are the very fundamental areas of interest. So this chart is indicating the trends of PM's concentrations over the last decade or so. And it's re-emphasized the fact that the levels of PM concentration is way, way more than the WHO and the Ghana air quality standard. So that is also a very important point to the levels of PM concentration. This is also emphasized by the work by Donisio that also reached the fact that air pollutants both in 2.5 and PM10 are quite more than what is recommended by the WHO in Accra. In terms of the impact on public health, in Ghana, air quality, air pollution is one of the major health risks, public health risks in the country. In fact, it is one of the number 1 out of the 19 main health cause of death in Ghana. And what I want to say here is the fact that almost 100% of Ghanaians are exposed to 2.5, PM 2.5. And also the fact that it is also one of the major, it kills virtually 8% of 15,000 of Ghanaians die prematurely because of poor air quality. But over the decades, we've also observed that the household air pollution levels are decreasing while of ambient air are also on the rise. In terms of economic costs, yesterday, the World Bank even confirmed that the cost of air pollution to the states of Ghana is about 4.2% of GDP, which is around $2.5 billion. And it's more also re-emphasized by the fact that the focus is rather on the cost of ambient air pollution than that of the household air pollution. So, what are we doing to address the air pollution situation in Ghana and also in the major cities? One critical issue that we are trying to address is the lack of coordinated policy to address air pollution. SLCPs. And our first attempt to deal with this is the preparation of the NAP to integrate SLCPs. So that's a very important step that has been taken. The city of Accra has also adopted a mitigation plan to also help deal with the rising air pollution in the airshed. We have also adopted, interestingly, recently a motor vehicle emission standard, which is supposed to deal with the diesel engine emissions, and we are currently preparing the regulations to back this. Also, at a sub-regional level, at the ECOWAS level, we've adopted a protocol to regulate the amount of sulfur in gasoline and diesel, which is a very important step. We have also recently established or adopted a national standard for cook stove, which is also about household cooking. And recently, we've established a recycling plant that is dealing with the disposal of e-waste. Let me also conclude by highlighting some of the air pollution management related activities. Obviously, as a member of the CCAC, we are already implementing the urban health project. We also have worked with UNEP to implement the low emission transport project, which is looking at promoting free buses and fuel economy standards. And we are currently also working on something on open burning in the community in Accra, and currently trying to revamp the air monitoring infrastructure with the support from the World Bank PMH. I want to conclude by emphasizing the last point, which is the need to have a multi-sectoral engagement when it comes to the communities in terms of the air quality community, the health community, the climate change conversation, the development of the national agenda, and most importantly, also involving the local governments. For us, this is a very important step to take in terms of taking action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. That was wonderful. We're almost totally caught up. We have 20 minutes left for dialogue. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you for helping move us quickly along here. I would like to ask if Daniel and Professor Young Kim, if you're willing to stay with us for the dialogue, you're welcome to intervene and join us if you're available. I also like to invite our panelists to turn on your cameras so we can see your smiling faces. Today, for the dialogue, we're joined by Patrick Bucher from GIZ. We have Natalie Rubel from the World Health Organization and Andreas Ahrens from IKEA. Unfortunately, Anna Engrid from the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency suffered a power failure and will not be able to join us. I would like to start with, Natalie, I know that your time is quite restricted, so maybe we can start with you. And the first question, or the second question, actually, what are the key scientific, from your opinion, and maybe the WHO's opinion, if you can speak on their behalf, but what are the key scientific and technical political barriers that we need to overcome to bring air quality action and measures to scale, particularly in a way that benefits climate in the near term and on a pathway to 1.5 degrees?
Thanks a lot, Nathan. And very sorry, I have the camera on, but it seemed not to work. So there is, I think you see this very black screen, so I'm sorry for that. But I turn it on. So yeah, no, thanks a lot. And I would just like to highlight, to just give two examples or two entry points. And mainly I would like to focus on the fact that one of the key barriers that we are actually already overcoming but still needs to be overcome more is that political action on implementing FLCP reduction strategies definitely, will benefit from a very full understanding on the quantification of the near-term benefits mitigation actions. So although, as I was saying, a lot has been done in regard, there's still a lot that needs to be done. And in this specific context, the appreciation of the health and both also the economic benefit as a measure among the public and decision makers is something that we really need to rely on a very easily understandable quantification of the effects, or the positive effects. So, and what I want to stress is this easily understandable quantification, because certainly public concern over the health impacts of air pollution is an increasing driver, for social movement and action. But you need to have it in a way, highlighted, expressed in a way that this is easily understandable and translated to inaction. So I want to give an example of a piece of work that, WHO has actually been starting to do jointly with the CCAC, where we are looking at not only looking at the mortality impact from air pollution, but also the morbidity, and then also having the economic impact calculation being included. And the reason why I'm stressing the morbidity is that this is something actually that is a key argument. The evaluation of the economic costs, but also the morbidity-related costs, is something that really is important and can be triggered and used as an argument for changing policymaker and the key policymaking audiences will be much more, interested, if I could say, or reactive to this direct cost of illnesses. So they're much more likely to be persuasive. So one of the barriers, to go back to your question, was that indeed this is something there's a lot of work that has been done, but it still needs more to be done. And so having, very solid methodological approaches, quantifying the economic costs, conducting the assessment of these mobility costs, and then presenting them to policymakers is, I think, something that is one of the priorities. At the same time, and I would like to conclude by that, I think that at the same time, although we are making, putting the focus on the economic and the health benefit, terminology, I think that there needs also to be a shift in an acknowledgement that health perspective is also focused on a health benefit analysis approach. So having, a broader from health benefit analysis and moving to a public health protection approach. So in order to really encompass a very large spectrum of action. So just the first thoughts.
Great, thank you very much. A lot of food for thought. I'd like to turn now, actually, to Andreas. We have a great opportunity here with the head of climate for IKEA. IKEA is a global leader in the private sector on supply chain management of greenhouse gas emissions, and now I know you guys are looking at the implications for managing air quality and air pollution emissions. And I'm wondering if you could speak to the same question: what are the scientific and technical, political barriers that you see? But even more broadly, why does IKEA see this as an opportunity, and why is this an area of interest?
Thank you, Nathan. Just trying to be a bit sweetly modestly, we're just trying to do what's needed of us to cut our emissions in half by 2030. No, but what we see when we can combine it is, of course, we have a goal now to halve our emissions by 2030, but there's so many synergies between greenhouse gas mitigation and improving farming practices and so on, and the air pollution agenda as well. And how the situation for us as a company is that we have a set accounting standard for greenhouse gas emissions, but we don't have one for air pollution as well. So if we would have a similar one, just like we could easily through the energy use and the farming practices we have, actually easily quantify the emission of air pollution, so the generation of air pollution as well. Because right now, there's tons of science there. I'm really thankful being invited to the scientific panel, but it's really difficult to access as a private company as well. So if we would have such an accounting and reporting standard and having maybe a bit simplified emission factors for air pollution, it would enable us to quantify our generation of air pollution across the whole value chain, from the raw material extraction and processing all the way down to the product end of life, so the incineration or landfills, etc. So this would be a huge, powerful tool, and I really like what you said, Nathan, as well. It shouldn't be driven to get, climate first and then air pollution, but this would really enable us to drive air quality for the sake of air quality and really improve the life of the moment. Hope that answered your question.
It does. Thank you so much. Yeah, I might have to come back to you, though. Let's pick your mind on this one. I'd like to turn now actually to Patrick, because I know Germany, you've had a strong air quality program. You do a lot of strong air quality work in Germany, but GIZ in particular has had air quality programs before, and there's a growing interest in working more on air quality in GIZ. And I wonder if you could speak from that perspective, what is driving that, and what potentially we could do to help facilitate that from a scientific, technical, or a political perspective.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nathan. Thanks for giving me the opportunity here to speak. So being a scientist myself, I do have my International Development Agency hat on today very much. Yes, I think I should be honest and start with saying that, the aim of this session was as well to address air pollution, it says, as a development and public health imperative. And to be really honest, I think most international development agencies are not there yet to have really, to see that as a very important imperative. And I have to include Germany here as well. You're right, there have been quite a few projects in the recent past, focusing on air pollution, but they have been rather sector specific. They haven't been, I would say they haven't been very multidisciplinary as well, and definitely not integrative. Some of them have, but most of them have not. I was actually quite surprised when I joined this sector that air pollution is not seen at the moment, or hasn't been seen so far, as a very important angle to choose or to hang a lot of international development agencies projects on. And I think the problem there is a little bit that we are talking about a rather complex topic here, which is often falling in between chairs. It is even, you can see that within German ministries as well, it is not clear whether that is an issue of international economic development, international cooperation. Is it an environmental ministry issue? So even within Germany, this hasn't been clear so far. And I think how projects are organized these days, they're rather still, unfortunately, in silos. And we heard that earlier today, that we have to de-silo the topic of air pollution. Having said all this, I think at the moment we have a very unique opportunity to actually change this. And there are signs coming from German ministries that there is actually an appetite and as well a real will to change this. I think this building back better issue or topic is really giving us a great opportunity to actually focus on some cross-sectional topics. And I think it looks like air pollution has been hopefully identified as one of these topics. And I would really like to mention here that the issue, for example, between the susceptibility to virus infections of people who have been exposed to air pollution previously, there are quite a few studies out there. They have to be treated with caution, I think, but these studies have had an effect, definitely, and that has created a larger interest, I can say. And it looks as well as if due to the link between air pollution and climate, which has been almost enhanced as well through this COVID pandemic now, or the discussion about it has been enhanced, that has helped as well. And I would just like to finish with three short comments where I think the CCAC could be of help on the scientific, technical, and on the political side. So if I start with the technical side, I think you've done a very good job already in promoting good or best available technologies. And I think this has to be further enhanced. And we should look as well into exchange of technologies between different developing nations as well. So think about South-South exchange of technologies as well. The problem often is as well that these technologies are rather costly, not only when you purchase them, but when you run them as well. And we have to look into ways how to finance subsidies there, especially for developing nations. That's the one thing. The second thing, on the scientific debate, I think, and we've heard that just from Andreas, and I really appreciate that comment, I think there's still a lack of good information flow between science, policymakers, industries, and as well citizens. And I think the CCAC could really help in trying to untangle this rather complex issue of communicating science in a way that is really easily understood by everyone. And I do wonder as well whether the entire subject of citizen science, which has become quite popular during the last 5 to 10 years, whether that would be as well an interesting angle for CCAC to look into, to really, take home the message that air pollution is an issue issue affecting development, both on the national, regional, as well as on the household level. And the last point, the political issue, or the main task the CCAC might have there is, I think, the increased interest as well of the German government to actually work on the topic of air pollution in terms of international development stems partly as well from this first International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies we recently had. If there is some momentum on the international forum, then I get the impression, I've heard that as well from people working in other European or in our neighboring countries for the international development agencies there, if there is an international momentum visible, then the ministries are much more likely to invest into a specific topic. So if we could really, if the CCAC could really push the agenda upwards and maybe even, try to link it closer to IPCC discussions, for example, really to basically push this international momentum, then I think the chances are bigger that nations will and government will actually invest into this. Now, stop here.
Thank you very much. That was great. A lot of things to follow up on, certainly. We've got 5 minutes left. I want to pose a question to Kim and Daniel, and hopefully I'll ask you guys try to stick to 2 minutes, and then we will give everybody a last word before we close out. But both of you are presenting from countries that are suffering from poor air quality, in particular, as well, in fact, as we all are. But it is somewhat more acute, but for very different reasons. And probably and most likely the solutions are going to be very different, and the targets that we have to aim at, particularly in the next couple of years to achieve major benefits, are going to be somewhat different. So I wonder, from your perspectives, going to the first question, where's the greatest technical and political potential for us as a coalition to aim at to achieve real meaningful improvements in air quality that achieve near-term climate benefits at the same time? Maybe we can start with Professor Young-Hyuk Kim.
Well, I think the most important thing is public participation. Well, in some European countries, public participation is really at highest quality, but in most, quite frankly, in most Asian countries, mostly East Asian countries, public participation has not been a kind of a new one. It's kind of a new one, and we need a further public participation based on science-based information. That is most important thing, I think.
Perfect. Thank you. Daniel, do you have a perspective? You are muted. All right. Maybe he's having a technical difficulty. Hopefully he'll be able to join us here. So with 2 minutes left, we're gonna do a hard stop at the half-hour mark. Thank you, everybody, for participating today. As I said at the intro, there will be a survey that comes out immediately after this, where everyone will be able to weigh in, give their perspectives on the questions that have been asked to the presenters. This has been an incredibly robust and useful dialogue. I hope you all agree. And with that, I would like to give each member of our panel a final word or thought on concrete advice for the CCAC on how we should really be thinking about this 2030 strategy. particularly from the perspective of air quality management with benefits for climate. Natalie, I know you have to go here soon, so maybe you start if you're still with us. Oh,
thanks, and I managed to get the video on. So, thanks, Nathan. Yeah, so very quickly, but I wanted to really highlight the key role that the CCAC has been, playing in getting this the dialogue integrating health benefits with climate mitigation and air quality, and actually, not only outside but even within WHO and through the SNAP, this has been one of the major achievements. And I think that something that I would like to underline is some of the discussions that took place also recently about the future strategy of the health strategy of the CCAC, where the intersectoral approach, right, that it will play also, and health that will be at the core of this intersectoral approach. I think that is something that is very key for CCA's role in future, and having the CCAC amplifying this health message within the climate and the air pollution agenda. And actually, I think that one thing that I wanted to stress is the added value of the CCAC, not only to be acting at the global level, at the regional level, but really much at the sub-national level. And I think that as WHO, we would really like to invite the CCAC to have even a more prominent, role at the sub-national governments in supporting, as you have been doing over the last years, the implementation of key tools. And when we look at the health impact, the health benefits and sectoral interventions tool, but also assessments of SLCPs and air pollutant emissions at the very local level again. So I think this is something that should be further strengthened, and where I do think and believe that CCA's role would be, key in future. Over.
Thank you so much. Andreas.
I think the potential of working together here is endless. I mean, we have so much potential here. And I mean, just to shorten up, I mean, if we make this accessible, I think we can manage this. And I mean, you can't manage what you don't measure. So if we can get such a standard in place, which is accessible for many, not just companies, but also what we heard from Natalie, from municipality and other sectors, I think we can really do good here. So thank you.
Thank you. Patrick?
I think I would like to come back to the main topic of today, which is really black carbon. So I would really like to encourage the CCAC to carry on discussing with different nations how to include black carbon in their NDCs, which will have, short-term benefits, and in the mid to long term have as well, give international development agencies a lot of scope to work as well. And I think this is a really important topic that has to be carried out further.
Thank you very much. It's very well taken. Again, thank you all so much for your time. This has been wonderful. I invite all of you to have a wonderful night, afternoon, day, and morning, depending on where you are on this earth. This has been a really meaningful dialogue. Professor Young, maybe can you send us off with a final thought?
That's great. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye all.
Thank you.
Ciao. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you to everybody, and we keep talking.